Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the closing plenary session today. We are thrilled to have you with us, and we'd like to express our gratitude for your active participation throughout this conference. Oh, my name's Jennifer Ferretti. If you weren't here for the opening, welcome back, or nice to see you. As with yesterday's opening plenary, we are captioning this afternoon's event. To follow along with the transcript, please use the QR code on the screen, and I'll give that a couple seconds in case you'd like to grab that. Once again, we'd like to thank Michigan State University for hosting us. This group did a tremendous amount of work in order for us to have a wonderful experience over the last few days. We're so grateful to them for their efforts and to their warm welcome hosting our community this week. Yay! Put it back up. Just for a second. We missed their names on the opening, so we'll leave these up for a second so you can see who we worked with here at MSU. Plus the amazing volunteers who participated in shifts throughout the conference. We'd also like to thank our event sponsors, AM Cortex, For Science, TIND, Eastview Information Services and Wiki Education, Recollect, Locks, and LibNova. This event and the upcoming virtual DLF Forum could not happen without their support. So be sure to say hello if you haven't already, if you plan on joining us for the virtual forum. And now it is my pleasure to share a bit about our closing featured speaker, Germaine Halegoua. Germaine is the John D. Evans Development Professor and Associate Professor of Communication and Media and co-founder of the Urban Tech Collective at the University of Michigan. She is also the Director of Graduate Studies and member of the Executive Committee at the University of Michigan Digital Studies Institute. Her research focuses on the relationships between people, place, and digital media. In particular, she's interested in how visions of digital media by public officials and urban planners often conflict with popular imaginations and everyday experiences of digital technologies and infrastructures. And just like the opening plenary, after the presentation, we'll move into Q&A. Shared notes can be found at bit.ly/MSU2024, forum closing, all lowercase. Please welcome Germaine Halegoua.
Thank you. Can everybody, is this good? Okay, great. And if at some point people can't hear me, just give me a sign of some sort. All right. So thanks for inviting me. Thanks everyone for inviting me. And I'm excited to raise some points for conversation and to think with you about digital equity now and in the near future. From what I've had the opportunity to listen to over the past few days, there's a lot of attention and understandings of digital equity, AI, and information access that are both unique to your profession, but also apply more broadly to education, state, and federal policy initiatives, and involving understandings of what ethical and careful interventions in AI and machine learning design might look like. What I want to focus on today is in the title of the talk, After Access Issues and Futures of Digital Equity During a Time when AI and Machine Learning Technologies Dominate Discourses of Personal, Professional, and Public Computing. Before we begin, I should mention that I don't have a background in library or information science, which is why I was especially excited to be part of these conversations and to participate in the panels and all of the workshops over the past few days around information access, emerging digital technologies and practices, best practices for digital repositories, archives, and classification. So a lot of these I interface with as a user and not so much as somebody who's designing them. So I really appreciated your perspective. What I do study, oh, whoops, I'm in control here, right? I think. Yes. Okay, great. So I study cultural geographies of digital media, primarily in cities. To me, this means studying how places and identities are produced through media access and use, and how people create a sense of place through digital media, and how media adoption and use differ based on who you are, but also where you are in the world. And a lot of my work is meant to inform our understandings of media use in everyday urban life, and more so in rural life as well, but also the development of more equitable urban technologies and urban design practices. A lot of my past and current research focuses on investigating what happens when people interface with digital technologies of urban coordination, planning, governance, and city management, what some people refer to simply as smart cities, but that I think more broadly of in terms of digital placemaking, or how people in various positions of power and privilege create a sense of place for themselves and others using digital affordances and digital infrastructures. So in particular, I explore the varied imaginations, biases, and frictions within shared public spaces and digital placemaking endeavors. So my critiques of digital technologies in public shared spaces and urban environments tend to push back on ideological biases and corporate value systems to identify ways in which urban rhythms, sociocultural meaning-making processes, and marginalized communities' experiences and knowledges of inequity and difference can inform digital media design, adoption, and use. All of my work speaks to the goal of creating pathways and recommendations for a variety of stakeholders, mostly public officials, citizens, digital inclusion and digital rights activists, technology designers, and researchers to co-construct equitable urban futures. Many of the themes, case studies, and concerns in my work align with public libraries. So there might be some work on your part to sort of take some of the theories and some of the findings from my research and others' research from public libraries and translate that into your own case studies and scenarios that you've been thinking about over the past few days and think about daily in your work. But I think we'll find that there's a lot of interconnections and a lot of different ways to interpret some of the things that I'm saying that are applicable to you. So for the purposes of this talk, I'm thinking about digital equity as a condition in which all individuals and communities have the information technology capacity and literacies needed for full participation in society, political systems, economies, and we could probably go on and on all of the different sort of structures in which we're embedded in everyday life. Not just access, but adoption and meaningful use. So for example, and this is one example from my own work and my collaborators' work. So for example, in our broadband report for the state of Kansas, we felt that it was incredibly important to include a chapter on the role of public libraries and digital equity, which was written by PUPS researcher Walter Grotlick, and I'll tell you a little bit about PUPS in a second. It stands for Personal User Privacy and Security Device. So the chapter highlights some of the findings from an interdisciplinary research team led by sociologists and computer scientists, PI Dr. William Staples, and co-PIs Dr. Drew Davidson and Dr. Perry Alexander at the University of Kansas, who spent over 2 years collecting field observations across 3 municipal library systems at 8 different library branch locations in Kansas. They interviewed 56 library computer users on staff, collected network traffic data, and completed several iterations of the personal user privacy and security device, and they did usability testing. And so what this device is a USB-based virtual computing environment developed by the research team that's designed to afford public computer users increased customizability, session persistence, and security as compared to the restricted use settings on most library PCs. So basically, it's to make interfacing with a public computer feel more like a personal computer. And they saw that as a digital equity issue or something that would advance digital literacy and information literacy. The report reinforces understandings of digital equity based on intersectionality, that the reasons for digital inequity are plural and intersecting and sociocultural, not just related to cost or affordability, although that's very important. And the outcomes and impacts of digital inclusion initiatives are also varied and based on different intersecting experiences and conditions of marginalization. The underlying result in this report is that among diverse populations, libraries provide meaningful digital literacy skills, access to devices, and technological capital, or the benefits of having routine access to people with technological know-how, an idea that I'll return to a little bit later when we talk about meaningful connection. So now I want to start the discussion of access and evolving understandings of after access issues with a somewhat personal example. So almost 10 years ago, I married into a family who was very, very, very proud of the former director of Madison Public Libraries. Their father, grandfather, and husband, Bernard Schwab, who served as the director of Madison, Wisconsin Public Libraries from 1957 to 1981. He established the Central Branch in downtown Madison in 1965, and he was named Librarian of the Year in 1970. The building itself was named the Bernard Schwab Library and had its name engraved on the entrance until around 2012, 2013, when the building was renovated. And I bring him up not only because of this personal connection, but that hearing stories and reading interviews and commentary about what it was to be a librarian in a public library system during the late 1950s to early 1970s, or through the 1970s rather, pre-computer labs, pre-digital data management systems, revealed certain value systems that were shared among the members of his profession about access, privacy, community, and intellectual freedom in ways that resonate today and in ways that show a complex understanding of intersectional societal conditions, geographies, and experiences that may impede or aggravate information access within public systems, and that illustrate ways of thinking about three things that are important to digital inclusion and equity: access, after access issues, and meaningful connection. For example, insisting on the importance of a central library branch and more local library branches reinforces access. Even though people have access to library branches, they might have circumstances like time, cost, childcare needs, differential mobility that impedes or impacts their ability to get to the library to enjoy information access. Therefore, the desire to create mobile libraries, for example, and we're looking at a bookmobile from, I think, the 1970s, if I remember correctly. So an issue that arises after access. So having sort of bookmobiles in Madison neighborhoods can be seen as an early example of access, but also after access, an issue that arises after you gain access to a resource. So library access, computer or internet connection, public transportation, and so on. But advocating for a project like a bookmobile within city limits, bringing resources and exhibitions to people in the places they call home, their neighborhoods, their places that they feel a sense of groundedness and ownership of, also provides insight into what Bernie and others might have thought of as pre-digital networks of meaningful connection. So what I mean to introduce in this brief example is that libraries have continually provided access to resources and information with equity and emerging technologies in mind. We know this. Libraries are bastions of access, particularly digital media access. Countless surveys and evaluations of libraries repeatedly show the benefits of having computer labs, free Wi-Fi, printers, device and mobile hotspot lending, dedicated staff and volunteers in libraries that can answer a variety of information and computer access questions. And conditions during COVID emphasize the need for and reliance on these services even more. The image that we're looking at is from the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel in 2022. And it depicts one familiar experience of a digital after access issue. One that I experienced during COVID as well. When I was sent home from work during lockdown, knowing that my rural internet connection was not robust enough to support the connections that I needed for large file transfers and the digital activities that I needed to do my job. I had access to computing devices, data, digital literacy skills, even at-home internet connection, and the financial resources and willingness to pay for all of this. But my after access issue was the quality of my connection, as it intersected with my geography and the inadequacies of the commercial telecom industry to cater to me. Previous research from a variety of disciplines demonstrates how digital divides are not binary. Divides are not limited to have and have not. They are far more multidimensional and dynamic. So if you have access to a computer, it doesn't mean you know how to use it. If you have access to the internet on your mobile phone, you might rely on your phone to complete homework or a job application or complete tasks that are completely tedious or impossible to accomplish on a phone. You might think that the internet is only apps. You might have to intentionally travel somewhere, as we see in this image, to use the internet or a computer, and may be limited in the amount of time that you have at that console or in that location. Or you might have a personal computer and at-home internet connection, but the service is incredibly slow or unreliable. The examples are intricate, intimate, and extensive, but the short of it is that there are many forms of digital inequity, and these forms intersect with other socioeconomic inequities or marginalization a person experiences in their daily lives, and the social and environmental context in which people gain access to computers and the internet. So for quite some time, and I think in a variety of fields as well, digital equity has been considered far more than access exclusively. If we consider digital equity as a condition in which all individuals and communities have the information and communication technologies and literacies needed for full participation in our society, economies, information landscapes, then equity is not just access and affordability, but also a series of social relationships and relationships to technology that enable people to adopt and meaningfully use the technological infrastructures available, and also to be able to acquire the resources and skills that afford this sort of full participation. This space beyond infrastructure is where libraries have played and will continue to play an incredibly important role. So one example, and this is coming again from public libraries, but we'll get to some things that might be more specifically applicable in a second. So one example is the federally funded Digital Navigators program, where dedicated staff called Digital Navigators are committed to digital inclusion by overseeing digital literacy training, device and mobile hotspot lending and acquisition, building and leveraging community partnerships to support digital equity, working to create community ecosystems where connectivity, literacy skills, and device access are routinely maintained for library patrons, and performing evaluation of the needs of those populations that they serve. Although these programs and hires are difficult to maintain for a variety of reasons, and I'm happy to talk more about that in the Q&A, people invested in these programs have found them promising, so they have both opportunities and challenges. For example, 4 public libraries in Connecticut that received this funding, and this is quoting from an article from the Connecticut, the CT Mirror, over the course of an 11-month pilot, 4 ARPA-funded library programs distributed 350 laptops and tablets and held 850 appointments. And it seemed from the article they were very proud of those numbers. Evaluation of these programs reported that people most frequently sought out digital navigators to learn how to search for jobs, conduct online banking, telehealth, and access government resources, fill out housing applications online, and other forms of documents that were online or scheduling online. And having worked as a tech coach in public libraries pre-COVID, all of these activities sound very familiar and very similar to the questions that I would be asked as well. And here's another example. I won't talk about it at length, but of the benefits of having someone dedicated to digital equity on site at the library. So this perspective is not from a digital navigator program, but from our Kansas report. One patron noted the ways in which learning incremental tech skills, but being able to go to a place where you know there is always technology and literacy support builds confidence and motivation to continue digital literacy journeys. And finally, over the past decade or so, there's been shifts in thinking about digital equity in terms of meaningful connection, or what Vicky Katz and Carmen Gonzalez call meaningful digital connectivity. While meaningful connection is used to mean a variety of different things related to digital equity, so policymakers use it differently from broadband offices, use it differently from ISPs, or from digital inclusion activists, and so on. I do appreciate Katz and Gonzalez's conception because they offer a very specific meaning of what meaningful digital connectivity might be. And it's one that applies to the state of computing and algorithmic biases that we find ourselves in now. They describe meaningful digital connectivity as a condition when people possess the requisite technical skills to engage new communication technologies and mobilize information resources to be able to address a range of everyday goals and concerns. They continue, we're primarily interested in how meaningful digital connectivity can empower socially disenfranchised individuals, families, and communities to address broader social disparities that they are disproportionately likely to experience. The prefix of meaningful has also been applied to rethinking access and adoption of digital technologies. For example, in terms of meaningful broadband adoption, and I think when I say broadband here, we could also plug in like artificial intelligence or machine learning based technologies or other sort of like algorithmic technologies. So in terms of meaningful broadband adoption, Sita Peña Godaharan and Greta Byram note that to have meaningful adoption implies an ecology of support. institutions, organizations, and even informal groups that serve to welcome new users into broadband worlds, share social norms, practices, and processes related to using these technologies. Meaningful broadband adoption emphasizes the human-to-human interactions that are most helpful to individuals and families. For example, Katz and Gonzalez found that safety and privacy concerns influenced digital adoption decisions in their Arizona field site. Intensive surveillance related to immigration heavily influenced families' preferences to pay for their own digital devices and home broadband services, even if it was a financial strain, as opposed to going to libraries and other public locations to get online. And this was for safety reasons, that they experienced increased surveillance and intensive surveillance. Therefore, it was more relevant to them and meaningful to pay for connection at home to sort of feel safe. We need to think about what meaningful connection means now in light of AI and the sociocultural biases we know exist within the world and within these algorithm systems. The after access issues related to Gen AI and machine learning systems can be exponentially negative for historically marginalized communities and or people who lack information and digital literacy skills. The requisite technical skills needed when engaging with AI systems or predictive technologies are superficially similar to what library patrons have routinely come to computer labs and digital navigators for. So like search, help with filling out documents and applications, information literacy. So from a user end, to use something like Gen AI is very, very, like a library patron user end is very similar to other things that they know how to do. But the context in which these skills and data they produce, operate in is very, very different. So let's just take a brief look. And I know that just from spending the past 2 days with you, a lot of you are very, very familiar with this discourse and very familiar with these findings, but I think it's good to lay it out and then we'll kind of move on from it. So national surveys conducted by research centers like Pew have found that there's ongoing concern about AI in daily life, policing, and the workplace. And importantly, surveys have shown that Americans don't have a strong grasp about when and how they interact with AI, how AI systems work, and how to understand and interpret some of the outputs they produce. Intellectual property, and in some cases, one's likeness and voice, are being used to train AI without author or creator consent or compensation. And most training data sets aren't disclosed to the public. So if what Dr. Clemens, I guess it's on the left there, says is true, then this includes my intellectual property as well, under conditions that I have no consent or recourse for. And we do know that what she says is true. So another thing that we could be thinking about is the landscape of information literacy is changing in terms of misinformation and disinformation circulating through algorithms and social networks. Concerns stem from the question of when AI is used and how, as well as techno-panics about being able to discern what might be AI generated. But there are also important and related concerns around information literacy and information literacy education, learning to discern between credible information and inaccurate or fabricated information. This is an evolution of some of the literary or literacy issues prevalent among new internet users, where people have to learn to discern between content versus ad, for example. But these issues of information credibility are exacerbated through algorithmic systems and artificial intelligence. The harms, biases, and politics of these systems are felt exponentially by historically marginalized populations after these technologies have been implemented. People often experience and become conscious of AI through the benefits and harms that directly impact their everyday life and well-being. When something very noticeable goes wrong, and these negative impacts vary. It could be that certain expected information or images don't show up in a search, but offensive things do, that your known image of the world or yourself is not represented in a data set, your name or image or profile or data is classified in such a way that you are disadvantaged on the job market, in housing opportunities, credit or lending systems, or access to political and voting information. Or in the case that's represented here, wrongfully arrested for a crime that you absolutely did not commit, but were identified by a facial recognition system as a suspect. Here, we see an example of what Ruha Benjamin has identified as the new Jim Code, or what Sophia Noble discusses as part of a larger system of algorithms of oppression. Racial biases that exist within society and become institutionalized within government, policing, educational systems, and popular culture that are encoded and represented in digital systems that rely on pre-existing data sets and the worldviews and value systems of the sociopolitical and industrial systems within which they're embedded. And these biases have very real consequences beyond the incredibly damaging and harmful wrongful arrests. AI and machine learning systems that power facial recognition and computer vision are less accurate when it comes to identifying Black and brown faces, particularly faces that present as female. Joy Buolamwini, computer scientist and founder of the Algorithmic Justice League, demonstrated an extreme case of this several years ago when she showed how facial recognition systems couldn't see her face unless she literally wore a white mask over her skin. Several other harms and biases of these systems have been highlighted as well. Commercially available AI systems categorizing people of color as members of a different species, associating people of color with low-wage work, ad and content recommendation systems that promote and deny information to people based on race, ethnicity, gender, or other protected categories. For example, not showing certain housing or job opportunities to populations based on race, class, or gender, not showing certain news or political information or information about voting, which is going to be more important as we approach an election. And as my colleague April Williams has analyzed, not showing certain potential partners in dating apps based on race. Sophia Noble and other scholars have shown the ways in which something as seemingly benign as Google search and other search functions can produce stereotypical racist and misogynistic results. All of this occurs without people realizing that the information they are being shown or have access to is algorithmically curated. Other examples of misclassification, misinformation, and inaccurate information and biased representations come from generative AI. White skin is often programmed as the default. So if you don't specify skin color of an image or of a representation, then the person is automatically generated as white. Algorithmic audits have shown that in prominent Gen AI systems, an image of a janitor, fast food employee, and other low-wage positions, or a criminal or a terrorist, were all more likely to be a person of color. We have also seen that intentions to increase diversity within AI and machine learning datasets can backfire. As we've seen the controversial and historically inaccurate image on the right, or maybe it's the left, where Vikings were generated by Google's AI image generation as anything but white. And as statistician and writer Nate Silver tested on a whim, male NHL hockey teams now include women, according to the Gen AI. When we read the public response from Google, which is positioned in the middle, these results are seen as minor inconveniences or bugs that need to be tweaked or reversioned. And in this final example, we see the application of facial emotional recognition, FER, in hiring, a practice that may directly affect many computer library patrons at public libraries who search for jobs, who use public computers to search for jobs. In this example, several issues of access and after access that libraries typically guide patrons through are exacerbated. Patrons come to the library for internet connection and search for jobs and to access and fill out these job applications. However, some of these jobs may be requiring video and audio applications that can be automatically screened and sorted through AI. These systems process speech and language use, tonality, facial expression and emotion, skin color, background and noise levels, body language, and gesture. It's possible that some of the markers of being in a public computer lab, background noise, background movement, digital literacy issues, the type of computer you're connecting from might count against library patrons, as well as how these systems assess and categorize candidates. Having to record a video in a public space is already a disadvantage. It's not private. You can't speak at a regular volume. It may be difficult to focus. You may have to share personal information publicly. Overall, it's uncomfortable and would impact your video and audio recording, which is what the AI is processing. Further, there's a potential for hiring discrimination based on protected classes, including disability. An AI analysis of an application video or audio may determine that someone with a speech impediment, speech impacted by hearing loss, speech idiosyncrasy or slightly slower or faster pace to be poorly spoken or lacks speaking skills. Neurodivergent or vision impaired candidates or candidates who find it difficult to maintain eye contact with a camera or machine may be read as unfocused or nervous or uninterested and so on, which would discount them from certain job positions. Additionally, researchers have found that when similar technologies were used in court cases, if a testimony was written in a dialect of English, the AI would recommend a more severe criminal sentence. So obviously then, having said all of that, and I know these are things that you already know because I've heard your conversations over the past couple of days, but it's obvious then that many people, and some of you in this room, have called for and continually attempt to enact shifts and radical transformations in algorithmic logics, ideologies, values, imaginations, ethics, and design, implementation, and evaluation processes. In light of the recognition of discriminatory biases and calls for ethical and/or responsible AI, algorithmic fairness has emerged as a way to assess and design some sort of equality into these systems. Fairness in this conception emphasizes equal treatment for individuals based on their attributes, profiles, or behaviors at a particular point in a computational sorting or decision-making process. Ben Green, who's an assistant professor at the Ford School of Public Policy at the University of Michigan, echoes prominent, I think has a background in mathematics as well, echoes prominent perspectives in the field when he argues that the fairness approach, because of its narrow scope of analysis, formal algorithmic fairness overlooks a great deal, such as the social context represented by data, the impacts of policies enhanced by algorithms, and the full suite of possible social reforms. Fairness implies that there's a technological fix to equity and inclusion. Just adjust the mathematical model or the weights, and you'll get a better, maybe more acceptable, more accurate result. But acceptable and accurate to whom? And based on what sort of values of inclusion and diversity, and what sort of critical understanding or knowledge of the power of representation, and what sort of understanding of the world and pre-existing injustices and discriminatory and allocative harms. As my colleague April Williams and her collaborators point out in their, I think now foundational work on the limitations of fairness, fairness tends to be colorblind. It tends to mean colorblind, objective, scientific, universal, equal, neutral, where racism and biases are seen as edge cases, not the norm. That you can fix the bug in the technological system to make it more fair. Some of these technological fixes, such as fair machine learning, may include anti-classification, classification parity, calibration, diverse data sets for foundation models, and so on. For example, fairness tilts in the direction of introducing mugshots or images of incarcerated people of color that have already been collected into machine learning processes in order to introduce diversity into AI and machine learning fueled facial recognition systems to include more and more information into a data set in order to achieve equal number or percentages of images or percentages of images based on race, gender, and so on. But fairness is not achievable in the way that it's envisioned. And some scholars and critics go so far as to say that the concept itself is not helpful or productive, and that technology designers should aim for equity rather than equality. But I think the design still remains, or the question still remains in the age of AI and algorithmic bias, what does equity look like and how do we work towards this? So my colleague, Dr. Williams and her collaborator, Jenny Davis, have introduced and innovated the term algorithmic reparation as an alternative approach towards digital equity, a concept towards intersectional approaches to machine learning systems that displaces fairness in favor of redress. This approach, as they explain, goes beyond improving code. Instead, a reparative approach uses computational tools for social intervention to repair and remedy social issues while critically assessing when and where computation does not belong. Aurora Zhang, a researcher from MIT, presents a concrete example of algorithmic reparation in terms of housing justice. And for me, studying public spaces and housing and issues of sort of allocative harms around public space, like this resonates with me, but you could think about what the equivalent of this or what a similar model of this would be in the worlds in which you operate. So what example of algorithmic reparation in terms of housing justice might look like is this might include the litigation of algorithmic discrimination in housing, using computational methods to calculate damages from the past as well as the present. Or we may work toward repurposing and developing algorithmic methods toward resistance efforts that connect to reform and can be used to demand structural change now and in the future. According to these examples, a repurposing of algorithms for good or for redress in housing may include identifying landlords or agencies with the highest rates of discriminatory practices and evictions and making this data public. Surveillance systems that track the use of surveillance technologies or smart contracts, which are incredibly binding and very hard to sort of break or make malleable. Predicting where affordable housing might be needed in areas of rapid gentrification, or work that rebalances power hierarchies between tenants and landlords, particularly in units zoned as affordable housing or areas of escalating rent increases. At the center of these reparative approaches is also the idea of listening to and learning from those who are the most negatively impacted by the societal biases coded into algorithmic systems. Alongside this approach, April Williams and colleagues at Mozilla, as well as our research team at of which April is a part of, are working on a needs translation approach, a set of practices and ideas for how to translate the needs of impacted communities into technology design. And furthermore, to identify competing values and needs among tech researchers, tech designers, tech implementers, and marginalized communities where conflicts between people with socio-technical power and marginalized communities might arise. And then importantly, how to attend to these conflicts and competing values and needs in meaningful ways. Building on these ideas of algorithmic reparation, 4 colleagues at the University of Michigan and I are working on a concept of reparative AI, or a model of repair rather than refusal and resistance that moves beyond fairness. The image we're looking at now is from a mixed media installation by artist Mimi Onuoha called The Library of Missing Datasets. The project is a physical repository of things that have been excluded in society where so much is collected. And that was a quote from Mimi Onuoha describing her own project. She uses the term missing to mean not just that something doesn't exist, but maybe that it should or ought to exist. And thus questions the reasons and infrastructures that prevent or diminish the need for the existence of this data set. The valuing of the documentation and persistence of certain knowledges and experiences above others. Onuoha's artistic interpretation locates the absences or maybe the glitch in the repository, unmasking it, calling it by name, and making it plain and tangible for all to acknowledge. We used this image on our website for our reparative AI project because we admired the artist's work in oeuvre and that this piece represents the logic of reparative AI for us. A reparative AI approach has the goal of recognizing and rectifying structural inequity and provides both a theoretical framework and a toolbox to repair AI. Emphasizing questions of power and socio-historical context to name, uncover, critique, and provide redress for algorithmic harms before they occur, as well as during and after implementation. A reparative approach to AI would intervene in the value systems, consciousness of discriminatory practices and power dynamics within society, among designers and industrial actors, as well as among those impacted by AI's integration into everyday digital systems. Collectively, our project team is focused on research questions that encompass the life cycle of AI, from its historicization and conception, industry practices and regulation, and everyday use. Our approach arises from a cultural studies tradition of tracking historical and contemporary networks of power and culture, seeing each of these moments as sites of struggle where the meaning of AI and the socio-technical power to construct that meaning is enacted and contested. As we continue to develop and define this approach, we'll be looking towards libraries, archives, digital inclusion practices, and ethical and community-informed interventions in information and collection management practices to help us think through practical and theoretical understandings of reparative AI and digital equity. We might not have time during this talk or Q&A, I think it's only like 10 minutes of Q&A, to concretely think through the application of algorithmic repair to content management systems or AI use within library collections or UX or public computer labs. But you've been directly and indirectly thinking about these issues throughout the conference, which has been really exciting for me. And we could leave this conference continuing to think about the after access issues that arise with AI and machine learning systems, and whether this concept of reparative AI could be used within library information management and archival contexts. What would this look like? What might a system that corrected for bias in institutional systems and differential experiences of social, economic, cultural, and technology be? Would AI or any computation even play a role in a system like that? Or is the repair of algorithmic harms and biases an ongoing social and relational process rather than any sort of technological fix? Libraries and archivists have been on the cutting edge of data processing and information science, computation in the workplace, as well as training for public digital literacy and tech literacy education, often filling gaps where other institutions and services and resources and access fall short. Libraries are already adopting AI in the workplace in robust ways, and I don't have to list all of them, but we've been talking about them for days, and that's also been very exciting. And also questioning critically how these AI and machine learning things are implemented for their users, for their communities, and for themselves. And libraries will be faced with many access and after access issues towards creating spaces of meaningful connection and information access with emerging technologies. As proposals and grants regarding AI and digital equity continue to be made public, librarians should be central to these efforts and initiatives regarding what meaningful and ethical connection to AI is and will be. And the other day, I think it was on July 24th, so that is still the other day, right? The NTIA released a call for digital equity competitive grants, for which I imagine maybe a lot of you, or maybe the institutions you're involved with, or maybe your community partners may be applying for. In light of your experience and perhaps conversations from this conference, consider after access issues as you've always done, and think about what an ethical and reparative relationship with AI in the workplace, at points of contact with library and collection users, and in the lives of your communities might be. You have the exciting and important position of bringing a wealth of unique and ongoing expertise in working to create meaningful connections to information in this evolving space. My research team for reparative AI, as well as others, will be looking towards you for insight into how to develop more equitable and reparative and digital ecosystems moving forward. So thanks.
Hi, thanks for your talk. In your view, is explainable AI a part of the work that you see ahead in the context of reparative AI, which you're talking about?
This is a really interesting question. So the question, you had a microphone. I don't know that I need to repeat it, but the question was about explainable AI. So one of the things that we're doing right now is kind of like a concept map where we're sort of seeing, well, who's talking about responsible, who's talking about fair, who's talking about algorithmic resistance, who's talking about technological solutionism, who's talking about long-termism, who's talking about explainable AI. And because I think there's a lot of slippage, I'd be curious to talk afterwards about your take on this, but there's a lot of slippage between terms, and there's a lot of different sort of disciplinary buy-in to certain terms. I don't want to like speak too off the cuff or quickly, but if I'm remembering the map correctly, explainable AI is often taken up in tech world. So by computer scientists, by machine learning technologists, by people who are actually doing the mathematical and algorithmic models, because they see a value, and it's not a negative value, right? And trying to be transparent or trying to sort of show, well, this is what we're doing, and trying to explain it to people who don't understand. I think there's a lot of different weird power dynamics and perceptions of expertise there, but I think that's one of the models we want to move beyond. That transparency is not enough, that fairness is not enough in the way that it's been actionable, right? In the way that it's been actualized in the imaginations of the people. So I would put explainable AI in sort of a different camp than fair, although I think the two sort of overlap. So I'd say reparative would be beyond, right? How do we not just achieve some sort of equality that's usually computationally measured or that's quantitatively measured, but how do we get towards that meaningful connection where things are really relevant and beyond useful, but also beyond fair towards like repairing something or caring about a community, or kind of using this technology, which we hear so many negative things about, usually in the Gen AI world, right? But how do we use that to sort of undo some historical damages or undo missing data sets or things of that nature? But thanks for that question. Other questions? Or I'd also be curious to hear if something, what would be something in your world that AI could help you repair, or that you're looking towards computational systems to maybe help you undo some previous damages to or biases within collections, or something that you could imagine a computational system helping you with in terms of care for a cultural heritage collection or for the community behind that collection or anything like that. Oh, I see a question.
Hi, thanks for the really engaging talk. I just going through some of the images you showed, like you showed the OSTP blueprint for AI, so this policy recommendation. You also talked about, kind of community organizing principles or academic approaches, and your report on, rural access. And it seemed like you're highlighting a lot of different, levels of approach. And as we know, a big problem with this is that, this regulations are very loose and vague, and every industry is sort of jumping in very quickly, pouring tons of money into these systems and kind of moving ahead faster than anything can catch up with it, from copyright to, licensing to deployment to regulation, safety, and so on. So I wonder if you have an overall vision, like where's the place, where's the fulcrum that can really sort of make the change that you hope to see in these systems?
Yeah, that's an excellent question as well. And I'm not going to say that I have the answer, but one of the things, I think that a lot of, I don't want to say like too much cloud or a lot of cloud is put behind regulation, but we all know regulation moves kind of slowly, like much slower than the pace that you're talking about, right? Like the move fast and break things. And I liked, one of the things that I appreciated was there was some talk, I think it was this morning, where they were talking about move slow and carefully, right? But we know that moving slow and carefully is not the pace at which technology is moving at the same time, right? So I think that one of the things we could be thinking about is, and this is something that came up several times in several different ways among the past few days, are principles and values at a more local level, right? So, and I know that sounds very small and that sounds very insular, but if you're coming up within your institution, your own set of principles and values for how AI is developed, how it's used, what data sets are used, what data sets are not, how you sort of deal with vendors, what's the pace at which you deal with vendors, what the pace of evaluation is, what are your practices for evaluation and review, do you have audit teams, algorithmic audit teams? So I think there is promise for more localized or contextual interventions. That's one thing we're also writing grants for right now, is to sort of like work with different communities and different stakeholders to kind of figure out what the intervention is and where. But right now, my answer to that is sort of like, I think a lot of change is going to have to happen on a local contextual level, and that's really by us in some ways. But I do really appreciate how over the past couple of days, there was a lot of talk of that, I feel like, amongst all of you, was how do we sort of get together and have focus groups and get together and have listening sessions with other stakeholders? How do we build value systems? How do we explore our own value systems? So I see a lot of promise in that community organizing kind of ground up swell, but I do recognize that I think we need regulation at the same time. I think it has to work both ways, but we're in this moment where everyone's figuring it out, right? So it's both exciting and perilous and all of the above. But if you have ideas or things that you think might work or we should be considering, I'd love to hear also what you're working on and thinking about too. I think we have time for one more question or comment. Or not, we could be done. Great, well, thanks.
Okay. Oh, great. It's here too. Okay, so thanks, everybody. That wraps the in-person 2024 DLF Forum. And if you see me up here, you know that there are a couple more logistics to go over before you're free to go home. We are so grateful to you all for attending this year's event. It's, a bit of an experiment this year. So we're really happy that you've been along for the ride with us. If you'd like to return your lanyards and any unused meal tickets, you can do so on the tables at the back of the room. We hope to see you at the virtual DLF Forum happening October 22nd to 23rd. And you can stay up on forum related news by subscribing to our newsletter, and the QR code is here on the screen. And in actually just a few minutes, about 10 minutes, you'll receive our event feedback survey in your email. And we'd really love to hear from you. We always love to hear from you, but especially this year, since we're trying something new. So safe travels home, and we hope to see you again soon. Thanks, everybody. Take care.